Jimmy Butler has now requested a trade out of Miami, leaving the Miami Heat to scramble to do something. The question is, who's going to bite on a Jimmy Butler trade, and should the Miami Heat still move the disgruntled star at this year's trade deadline, or should they take the risk and wait till the end of the season? We're going to talk about all and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. So after Pat Riley came out and adamantly said that the Heat would not be trading Jimmy Butler this season, Jimmy Butler has now officially requested a trade from the Miami Heat reportedly, and in a post-game press conference yesterday saying this: I want to see me getting my joy back playing basketball. Wherever that may be, we'll find out here pretty soon. I'm happy here off the court, but I want to be back to somewhat dominant. I want to hoop, and I want to help this team win, and right now, I'm not doing that. When asked directly if Jimmy Butler felt like he could find his joy again in Miami, he said, probably not. So, of course, this has now led to the marriage between Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat ending. And the Miami Heat, in my opinion, have to do something. They have to make a move here. They cannot kick this can down the road, because if you look and you watch throughout Jimmy Butler's history, whenever, regardless, and this is not taken away from who Jimmy Butler can be and has been at times on the floor, when Jimmy Butler is disgruntled and he wants his way out, it turns into a shit show. You look at Chicago, you look at Minnesota, you look at Philadelphia, right? It's been the same place basically everywhere Jimmy Butler has went. Once he makes his desire, once he comes to the realization he no longer wants to be where he's at, that's how it turns with Jimmy Butler. There's no a way around it, right? And when you already look at some of the comments from Bam and Tyler Herro in regards to the Jimmy Butler stuff, I think it's already turning into a distraction for this team, which you already heard before. That's part of the reason Pat Riley came out and made his statement that the Heat would not be trading, because he said that it had turned into a distraction around the team. And so when it comes down to it, right, at the end of the day, this thing is now turning into exactly what the Miami Heat did not want this to turn into, and that is the shit show when it comes down to it, right? When asked about it as well, Tyler Herro says, I'm not sure. I have no clue. I'm not the coach. We tried to get him involved, I thought, as far as Jimmy Butler not being involved in the game. When Bam was asked about it, he said this: think it's a bad night all around. Obviously, he's frustrated. He feels like he's standing in the corner, so he's got a lot of things going on in his corner. Like, I think when you just see it, like, it's turning into what this team did not want it to turn into. And while the Miami Heat maybe wanted to wait to try to use their leverage over not a lot of teams in the NBA in the offseason, having a lot of cap space to give him the money that he would want, at this point now, I think you got to come down to it. Like, Jimmy Butler, they have to move Jimmy Butler. Now, with him officially requesting a trade, that could absolutely affect the offers that they're getting out in the market. And I think right now, the Miami Heat are going to have to go and basically let every team bid against each other and try to get the best deal out of it. Because now if they were looking any type of, I won't say that all their leverage is gone. They still do hold some leverage, that there are going to be teams that are interested in Jimmy Butler that have zero chance to sign him in the offseason unless they just either do a sign and trade anyway with Miami or make a series of deals when it comes down to it, right? And, reportedly this one's from Shams that, questioning Jimmy Butler's effort was kind of the last straw for Jimmy, and that's now what led to him officially requesting and asking for a trade. Now, you have to look at this at, all right, who are the realistic suitors for Jimmy Butler out on the trade market? And that's where it gets a little bit more interesting when it comes down to it, right? So just kind of look at this right now. The Heat owe a lottery-protected first-round pick in 2027 to Charlotte, right? If that does turn into an unprotected first-round pick in 2028, if the Miami Heat do not make the playoffs during the 2026-27 season. So theoretically, that's kind of what the Heat are looking at. Also, let's keep this in mind as well. The Miami Heat right now, if they do let Jimmy Butler walk, or they take back expiring salary, which could be something that they're looking for right now, that would clear $47 million. They'd be $47 million below the tax, which can help them significantly, right? A $14 million non-tax player exception, a $5.1 million biannual exception on top of that, right? So ideally, that the Miami Heat are going to want to, if they're moving on from Jimmy Butler, unless they're getting a player that they love, expiring salary, right? Because even if you can get most of Jimmy Butler's contract back and expiring, that really adds to the flexibility that they probably covet leading into the offseason, right? Now, when you look at some of the teams, even though reportedly Jimmy Butler requested a trade, but he did not request a trade with preferred teams, right? But when you look around it, we've heard prior that Jimmy Butler prefers Phoenix, Golden State, Dallas, and Houston. And all of these teams are going to have a hard time trading for him. When you look at the Phoenix Suns, right, the clearest path that they would have for trading Jimmy Butler, especially with the fact that they can't aggregate salaries, they can only do one-on-one player trades, right, because they're over the second tax apron, is Bradley Beal. Now, the problem with that is Bradley Beal has shown no desire to be moved. In fact, we've heard that he will not waive his trade clause, right? He doesn't want to be traded. And on top of that, the Miami Heat don't really have interest in Bradley Beal right there, right? So because of the Phoenix Suns and how they don't have any mobility really when it comes to the trade market, they can't aggregate salaries, they can't combine multiple players to try to get Jimmy Butler. They can't do any of that, right? They can't even trade multiple players in trades, period. So because of that, it really kind of leaves the Phoenix Suns as a team that can't make a trade for Jimmy Butler. It's very unlikely to happen. You look at the Dallas Mavericks, another preferred team by Jimmy Butler. As of what we've heard, they have no interest right now in pursuing that move and what it would take to move and get Jimmy Butler. So you can scratch them off the list. The Houston Rockets, who seem to be right now prioritizing their draft capital, their young assets, and they want to make a run at a legit superstar if they become available in the offseason. But they seem content with riding this thing out because they're ahead of schedule, right? With this young core that they have and seeing where the chips fall, right? And so because of that, it doesn't seem. Now, they have a ton of draft picks. They have young talent. If they wanted to make a move for Jimmy Butler, they could. But reportedly, the Houston Rockets covet players that are kind of bigger stars than Jimmy Butler if they're going to make that move off their young talent. And then a player like Jimmy Butler at 35 years old really may be a little bit out of their range, right, as far as the range to compete. The Houston Rockets seem like a team that may be willing to make a deal this offseason, but Jimmy Butler is probably not going to be that move. So that takes the Houston Rockets out of that. Now, I want to keep in mind all these teams, this could very well be posturing. We've seen teams kind of feign interest before and then end up, just to kind of keep the value down. So we'll see what happens there. Next up, you have the Golden State Warriors, right? The Golden State Warriors, after going 12-3 to start the season, have fallen back down to earth. They're 17-16 overall right now. And this seems like a team that could make some sense for Jimmy Butler here as far as one of his preferred teams, right? You look at the pairing of the fit with Butler next to Steph Curry and with Draymond Green. It makes some sense when you look at it with the way that the team plays. They have a really strong head coach. They're an older roster anyway, right? So that's a thing that you look at it. But it seems like right now the Golden State Warriors have gone from a team was really big on at one point moving Andrew Wiggins to now they seem maybe content with keeping Andrew Wiggins, which that could really ham up their chances of making a move for Jimmy Butler. Now, I think when you look at it, of course, like again, could very well be posturing. But you look at Andrew Wiggins, he's 6 years younger than Jimmy Butler and putting up still 16 points on 44% shooting, 40% shooting from three, right? Those type of things. He's starting to trend upwards, but that could actually help his value if the Golden State Warriors decide to make that move. I've always personally had fit questions on it. Is that really the type of player they want to add to Steph Curry to take advantage of where he is right now? It also seems to be like the Jonathan Kuminga aspect of it, right? He's clearly what the Golden State Warriors would probably use in a trade to get a player back right now. They didn't give him an extension for a reason. I do think the Miami Heat would be interested if they make Kuminga available in those trade talks, but we'll see. Golden State Warriors seem like they may be willing to make a deal, but then again, they could be content not. So then let's look at the other teams, right? The teams that aren't on this list when you look around the league, right? You look at the Orlando Magic. They're not going to completely tear their roster apart for a player like Jimmy Butler that's 35 years old. You look at the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're definitely not with how good they're playing amazingly right now. The Milwaukee Bucks, it would have to be Dame Lillard for Jimmy Butler, and they're not going to do that. I just don't think they're going to do that, not with, even though they lost last night, but they're still a team that has started turning their season around. The Indiana Pacers. Listen, I could find a path for the Indiana Pacers to maybe get involved, to maybe make some sense. But then again, would the Pacers be willing to make a move for a player that's as old as Jimmy Butler to get them over the top? And I just don't know, right? And then you have the rest, right? The Nets, the Raptors, the Hornets, the Washington Wizards. I don't think they're willing to offer up any of their assets for a player like Jimmy Butler. I just don't think so. They're not in any place to really contend in that Eastern Conference. So then the last three teams on the list for the East, right? The 76ers, the Chicago Bulls, and the Detroit Pistons. The Philadelphia 76ers, I don't think, unless it would be a Paul George for Jimmy Butler swap, with the way that Paul George has really not played well for that Philadelphia 76ers team, maybe they'd be willing to. But then again, you got to look at it from the Miami Heat perspective, right? Trading a player like Jimmy Butler and getting Paul George back, right? Now, if they had confidence that Paul George could stay healthy and work his way out of this slump, maybe. But I just don't see them making that swap for them. I just don't see it happening personally. Paul George, when you look at his season so far, like especially the 2 games so far in January, he's averaging 24.5 points per game in the month of January, over 56% shooting. Only been 2 games, but if they're encouraged at all by that, they may not look to make that move either. So let's scratch them off of it. The Chicago Bulls, Zach LaVine, Jimmy Butler. I think that the Miami Heat would have to include some of their young pieces if the Bulls are smart to want that. And I just don't think that that's a team that makes any sense for them to take on a potential $56 million contract next season. I know that they reportedly want to move Zach LaVine, but that doesn't necessarily make the most sense for me there. So overall, like, there are not a lot of teams. The Detroit Pistons seem content again, but with the injury to Jaden Ivey, maybe, but I don't think they have the contracts to match it there. So let's pivot and look at other teams in the West, right? Teams in the West: OKC Thunder, Memphis Grizzlies, San Antonio Spurs, Denver Nuggets. Those are the teams as far as that are contenders or near contenders that I could see. The Denver Nuggets, we've heard prior that they do have some interest reportedly in Jimmy Butler. So that could be a way that they pivot. I'll leave the Nuggets on there as a potential. The Memphis Grizzlies, I don't see it. The Spurs, depending on what they would have to give up, maybe, right? As far as how do they view really how important is it to get Wemby some playoff experience this year? The OKC Thunder, I don't see the Thunder making any deals when it comes down to it, right? All right. When you look at it, the Lakers, the Clippers, I don't think that with the size of Jimmy Butler's contract, they can find a way to get it done. The Minnesota Timberwolves, I don't look at either. And then you look at Portland, Utah, New Orleans as teams that really aren't any type of position to sacrifice future assets to get Jimmy Butler. So when it comes down to it, man, yeah, I don't see it happening, man. I don't see it happening. I don't see the OKC Thunder giving up the kind of the middle players on their roster to make a pursuit for Jimmy Butler. The Grizzlies would have to sacrifice a Desmond Bane level player. I don't see them doing that either, right? So not to say that there are no suitors. It's just the Miami Heat are probably not going to get a great deal in this, right? And I'm sure that that's what their hope was initially when all this kind of went down. And they may settle. Like once a player makes their trade demands known and every team you lose a little bit of leverage there, that's going to impact the return that Jimmy Butler, that Miami Heat get back for Jimmy Butler. And I think in all of this, an interesting conversation to have as well is that we may start seeing the end of the legacy contract in the NBA. And by legacy contract, for those that don't know, I mean when you give a player a contract that you don't necessarily expect them to live up to, but you're giving them a contract because of what they did in the past for their team. You look at Draymond Green, for example, getting that contract that he got with the Golden State Warriors, that was in large part a legacy contract. Now, the Golden State Warriors learned from that, and they didn't want to give Clay a legacy contract. Look at the same thing with Jimmy Butler. The Heat would not have been what they've been. I'm not saying they wouldn't have been a good team. They're coached well. Pat Riley would have went out and got some talent somewhere, but they wouldn't have been the team that they've been, having 2 finals appearances, things like that, if it wasn't for who Jimmy Butler was. But the Miami Heat clearly do not want to pay Jimmy Butler based off what he did. They want to pay him based off what he's going to do going forward. And I think with the second tax apron, we're going to see more and more of teams kind of being, aware of the legacy contract and not giving that type of deal away too easily for players anymore, because it does constrict what you're able to do so much. And if you near that second tax apron, you basically have no forward movement as a team really available. And it limits you so much. You can't get buyout candidates. You can't trade multiple players in deals. Like, it just limits so much of what you're able to do. So I think this Jimmy Butler thing is an interesting conversation to have, and we'll probably have this more in the offseason, is that the legacy contract is probably long and gone and dead. But you guys can let me know what you guys think on everything down below. What teams do you think make the most sense for Jimmy Butler as he's now officially requested a trade? Do you think the Miami Heat get a fair value trade back? Not a great trade, but maybe fair value back. I don't see it, but let me know what you guys think. Make sure you guys are following the show at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything basketball related. And we'll see you guys next time I feel like making a video, probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.